Joining us once again on the program is journalist, editor, and founder of DCReport.org, David K. Johnston. Welcome back to the Damage Report.
Glad to be here, John.
Glad to have you here. We've picked a good time. Donald Trump being president is always consequential, but there are a few periods perhaps where it's had the most impact than in the past few months. And we're speaking now as protests continue, and we've had a few weeks of Donald Trump's reactions to the concerns about systemic racism in law enforcement. Before we delve into some of the specifics, I would just love your impression of how he and his movement have addressed the concerns that have been raised through these protests.
Badly would be a polite word to describe it. The fact is that the kind of police brutality that we had documented so thoroughly by a very brave 17-year-old girl who held her cell phone steady for 9+ minutes has been going on for well more than a century. Back in the early 80s, I wrote a lot about it in the LA Times, and it didn't change anything. And now that we have this evidence, and you are seeing majority white crowds turn out in many places, in towns that are virtually all white, people turning out and giving Black Lives Matter demonstrations. What's happening is irrefutable evidence has caused people to open their eyes. Trump, however, can't change. He's incapable of change. So his response to this has been, these people are looters, they're monsters. I need to be with law enforcement. He'll make a few statements to the contrary to muddy the waters, but his overall handling of this is, to call him tone deaf would really be to offend the phrase tone deaf.
Well, he got a lot of criticism when he initially announced that his first big protest, first big rally, I should say, first was happening in a time when it still doesn't seem safe to do that, but that he initially chose to do it in Tulsa on Juneteenth. That criticism led to it being pushed back a day, which is the sort of retreat that I have not expected from Donald Trump. But he is still going to speak at that rally. I'm curious about your impression of him changing the date, but also what you expect out of this first big rally back on the campaign trail.
Well, I have no doubt that Donald Trump was unaware of Juneteenth. That doesn't surprise me one bit. But his minister of hate, Stephen Miller, who's from Santa Monica, Stephen Miller knew perfectly well what they were doing when they came up with this, he and Brad Parscale. So the intention here was a dog whistle, and they simply, wanted to, again, muddy the waters by holding it back a day. Now, the growth rate of the coronavirus in Oklahoma right now is horrendous. In a single week, they've doubled the number of cases per day. The R factor is about 1.2. If it's below 1, the disease stops spreading. Above 1, it spreads, and 1.2 is a very high spread rate. So we're going to, in about 2 or 3 weeks, see a big spike among Trump supporters who go to this indoor event in coronavirus cases. And I hope people don't die from it, but hopefully his followers will then begin to recognize how dangerous and foolish holding rallies like this is.
Yeah. I guess zooming out from Trump, hypothetically, if any legislation is passed to address the concerns of protesters, it would have to get past Trump. As you pointed out, there's been so much just undeniable footage of police brutality, and it seems like it's breaking through in a way that it hadn't to the popular consciousness. Do you think that the Republicans will agree to some sort of bill with actual substantive changes? And if they do pass something like that, is Donald Trump, especially in the approach to the general election, is he likely to sign it, knowing what we know about his base?
I don't think until we get a new Congress, we're going to see any substantive reform. And let's remember, the problem here is not police policies, it's culture. It is police departments who have a culture of not telling on other officers when something is wrong, and of absolute mistreatment of Black Americans. And the Republicans have a problem in that, for decades now, the Republicans have told us that they're the moral people, right? The moral majority was the phrase. And what we're seeing as they surrender to Donald Trump is the Republican Party consists of moral jellyfish. They're blind, they're spineless, and they're simply adrift in the waves of chaos emanating from the Trump White House. They're not going to do anything that really matters. And of course, much of this requires state legislatures to act and local governments to act. And there are some basic reforms. And one is failure to intervene when an officer is out of control should be both a firing offense and a criminal offense. Convenient loss of your signal on your body cam, and lots of police departments don't have body cams, and your dash cam should be punishable up to losing your job. And when we get those kinds of reforms, maybe we can begin to undo the culture, and maybe we can begin to move to having fewer police on patrol, which is just a waste of money, and more police delving into financial and other crimes because they're forensic accountants, they understand business, things like that.
You know, speaking of forensic crimes, at least loosely, I know that you had an article, I believe last week, talking about one way that hasn't been covered very much, that the Trump administration is preying on especially low-income minority communities. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, remember, Donald Trump promised that he was the champion of the forgotten man, but his education secretary, Betsy DeVos, who's a multi-billionaire, has taken the side of the bankers against the brains, against the students. Now it turns out the various laws we have to protect people seeking a mortgage from redlining, which is the practice of saying you're not going to make loans or only make them on onerous terms in neighborhoods where people are black, brown, or in some cases low income. In turning people away for credit cards, charging them higher rates for auto loans. We have laws prohibiting all of that on the basis of race, sex, religion. They're not enforcing the law. They're not doing anything at all about it. And that's because Donald Trump, his slogan really, his dog whistle slogan really is make America white again. And people need to recognize that. And of course, people who want that, people who really want, blacks and browns and women to know their place, they're going to continue to love Donald Trump.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.